Right, so continuing with that theme of what gives me my conviction, hopefully the big macro picture I've spelled out abundantly clear this morning. Long story short, liquidity drives crypto. It's as simple as that, and we are at a lull in global liquidity, and it's about to start spaffing out over the next year. Sorry, that's the wrong word. yeah. Sorry. So, I'm going to really bring things back to the basics, and some of you will have seen bits and bobs of me talking about this before, but there are some new people to crypto here today, and really it all comes down to these three things. I'm not in crypto because number goes up. That's just a nice byproduct. Oh, wait, ultimately, yes, we're here to make money, but the real underlying reason why I will never leave crypto in the foreseeable future is because it's our financial Noah's Ark that no one seems to be aware of. You know, as a percentage of the population, you can still go down the street and ask 100 people, do you own Bitcoin? Probably one person may have it stored on Coinbase. But yeah, we're so freaking early. I've got that much left for coffee. Sorry. So, I'm not a physicist or a scientist, but I'm like a physics science geek. You know, I'm not clever enough to be a scientist, but all I do in my spare time is just research science, you know, astronomy and AI type stuff. And one thing I've learned about science in my self-taught doctorate of science is that nature loves differentials. Differentials are everywhere when you open your mind and start looking for them. And the world of finance is no different. So in terms of weather systems, you have high pressure weather systems, and the wind flows to low pressure. That's basically what causes, the sun creates wind, basically, because it creates different hot spots, cold spots, and then we have a pressure differential there. We have high potential in terms of electricity, and the charge and the voltage goes towards the low potential. That's, you know, a typical circuit. The world, the universe is run by differentials. You have the world's wealth flowing constantly from the uninformed over to the informed. That's a societal differential. We have low economic output, and all the money flows to high economic output countries. The higher the economic output country there is, the more control, the more power, he who writes the rules, effectively. And also when it comes to money, weak money always loses to hard money. And so, in fact, there's a couple of you here who saw me talk about this last week, but it's so pivotal. So this is why we really need to understand what's happening in Argentina, because I'm a student of money, I'm a historian of money, and I still am amazed at some of the stories I come across. And, you know, there's been, 25 hyperinflations over the last 25 years-ish, and a lot of them in big developed countries. And there's a recent development that's happening right now in Argentina, which, you know, up until 2020, I wasn't aware. So in 2020, when I discovered Argentina and what's going on, it shocked me to the core, because there was me thinking, you know, I've got my finger on the pulse of most things around the world, economically speaking. And this shook me because I started really diving into it, and I learned of a story of a family, which haunts me, I guess. So the names are different, but let's call them Pablo and Paula. I just found some generic Argentinian names. And the reason it's so scary, this story, because it is the average middle to upper middle class British family. You know, there's no difference in comparison here. It's just a different country. So Pablo was an engineer, a high-flying engineer for I think an oil company, on the equivalent salary of, you know, let's say a 60 grand salary in the UK. And Paola was a project manager for another big, you know, Fortune 500 type company on probably the equivalent of a 55K salary. So as a couple, high earning couple, no kids originally. And then as the story progresses, they start popping out a couple of sprogs. So back in 2000, it was 1 Argentinian peso to the dollar. Everything was fine, and it had been that case for a long time. Bear in mind, Argentina used to be the richest country on the planet. Hence the saying, oh, he's as rich as an Argentine, or she's as rich as, yeah. But then shit hit the fan because guess what? Big government loves big government. Big government just bloats and bloats and bloats to the point where governments basically absorb and overspend, and yeah, it's just big government is bad. And then they start kicking the can down the road. So when shit hits the fan, what do politicians do? They try and print their way out of oblivion. So 5 years pass. It's now 3 pesos to the dollar, which is a 66% decline in the currency in terms of purchasing power. And the chart looks something like this. So Pablo and Paolo, they go to their IFA like a responsible couple would, and they go to their IFA and go, should we be concerned? And the IFA, like every IFA on the planet, will go, nah, you're fine. I've got a lovely portfolio of diversified assets and tracker funds. So they're suitably, appeased. They go on their merry way, and like, let's catch up again in 5 years, shall we? Cool. So 5 years pass. It's now 2010. 4 pesos to the dollar. I'm sorry if I'm speeding through this. We've got a lot to get through. So we now have a 75% drop in purchasing power in a decade. Now, a decade is like a heartbeat in terms of the economic, pulse. But a decade for most people seems to fly by, but it seems quite far. I mean, imagine your financial situation 10 years ago. It seems like forever ago, doesn't it? But to have a 75% purchasing power decline in that period is catastrophic. And the chart looks a bit bullish, doesn't it? As a trader, you're looking at that going, that's pretty bullish. So 5-year review comes up. They go back to their IFA and say, hey, should we be concerned? We're starting to see the news clippings. And what does David Brent say? Nah, you're fine. I've got a lovely portfolio of diversified assets and tracker funds, like every IFA on the planet says. So, okay, because this person has an alphabet soup of letters after their name, they trust him. This is, the authority paradox. 5 years pass. It's now 8.5 pesos to the dollar. The Argentinian peso is in the gutter, basically, because it's, yeah. At this point, when you look at the chart, you think, right, I need to buy some, I need to go long in this. How can I go long on this chart? So they go back to their IFA. It seems to be running away. What do we do? Now, bear in mind at this point, these guys are suffering because they've popped out 2 babies, like one does. Well, she has, not him. And then, well, these days, these days the husband could pop out a baby and the wife could, anyway. I prefer the old-fashioned women, as Ricky Gervais used to say, the ones with boobs and, fallopian tubes. So the old-fashioned ones are nice. Anyway, sorry, I'm going to get cancelled on YouTube. Nah, you're fine. I've got a lovely portfolio of diversified assets and tracker funds. Now, at this point, they don't quite like this advice because it's the same advice, vanilla advice they've had for the last 15 years. But there's 2 issues now. They got 2 young kids. Pablo hasn't had a pay rise in a long time. He's still got a job. Paola has had maternity leave for the last 2-3 years, is not earning, well, a fraction of what she used to earn, and she's got 2 kids to, juggle with. So her earning capacity is gone. And so they're struggling because what's happened is that they've accustomed themselves to the higher life. They had their nice house, their 2 German cars, their tennis clubs or whatever. But now they've got reduced earning capacity, reduced income, and higher outgoings. And not only that, the peso is basically this rug that's being pulled from underneath them. They don't understand that, he's got a really good job. He's done everything his parents and schools taught him to do well at school, get a good job, get good grades, blah, blah, blah. He's doing everything by the textbook, but he's still struggling to buy groceries. At this point, this is basically where the average UK family is right now. And in the US, it's a lot worse. People think the US is the promised land, but they're in a way worse of a state than the UK. So things they don't understand. And this is where mental negligence, I guess intellectual negligence is catching up with them, because they've just like put their head in the sand when it comes to money and economics and finance, and they just trusted some bloke that's just getting a payroll. To this day, and IFAs hate me, I've never in my life met a rich financial advisor, ever. And the one exception who was quite wealthy, guess what? Owned a chain of financial advisory branches. So was that person a financial advisor, or was that person a business owner? Business owner with about 50 IFAs in his payroll. So I've never met a rich financial advisor, and I've never met a financial advisor that puts their money in the same things that they're promoting. Now, for the video purposes here, the only leeway I can give that industry is that they have their hands tied and handcuffed behind their back. They can only promote the things that the FCA allows them to promote, or if they're in the US, they can only promote things that the SEC allows them to. And unfortunately, this whole regulatory landscape, these organizations, the FCA, SEC, when you really look at the evidence of what they've done over the last 20 years, it's like, okay, we're going to shield the public from all the best investments on the planet, and we're only going to let them put their money in things that don't make money, i.e. tracker funds and stuff, because that makes the fund managers rich, because fund managers get an expense ratio per year, so they get a percentage of their AUM, and they get a performance fee. It used to be 2 and 20, it's now, obviously tracker funds is way lower now. Anyway, back to the story. It's at this point Pablo starts to get a benign medical condition. It's treatable with medicine, but it's nothing serious as long as you've got medicine. 2020, it's now 62 pesos to the dollar. I mean, yeah, it's a joke now. Once something gets to sort of a 75% drop, that's when maths takes over. And it's terminal. And the chart is the most bullish chart you've ever seen in your life. There isn't a single crypto on the planet that looks as good as that. Now, this is where shit hits the fan for the Pablo and Paola family, because at this point, they're ruined. Not only is Pablo taking pay cuts, even though he's like a high-flying engineer of a big oil company or whatnot, Paola still doesn't have any income. And because of the currency situation, not much has happened in their lives over the last 5 years, but because the currency's run away, they're now destitute. They can't afford to buy groceries. They go back to the IFA enraged this time, and the IFA just keeps saying the same bullshit. Now, 2020 is when I first found this story, and I started talking about this story to the realistic trader community in 2021, early 2021. And it was 98 pesos to the dollar when I started sharing this really with RT, which, 98, whatever. Chart is ridiculous. And this is where shit really does start to hurt, because they can't buy groceries now. And because their wealth has dwindled so much over the last 20 odd years, their IFA firm has kicked them out because they're too poor. So, sorry to inform you that we can no longer manage your funds as they've fallen below our threshold. And that happens, by the way. So not only has this person's ineptitude helped bankrupt them, Pablo dies because he sacrificed his medicines to buy food for his kids, and it is a benign medical condition. So now Paola is now a single mother with 2 kids, and their kids spend all day foraging for food. And this is not an isolated incident. This is most of Argentina right now. In countries where the currency devalues and runaway devaluation, the rich-poor divide only accelerates, maths, and then it's a case of the have-nots and the have-yachts. There's no middle class. So the reason I'm really trying to drill this into the back, or etch this into the back of your skull, is because this is happening in the UK right now. Every one of you, not you guys, but the average UK family is where Pablo and Paola were back in sort of 2010, maybe 2015. This will happen in the UK. And what governments always do in this situation where things really start running away, what do? They raise taxes Oh no, they talk about tax cuts, but they raise them, and then they print more money. That's all they do. What's the CGT rate in Canada right now? 66%. They've raised it. 66%. It's stupid. It's short-sighted, because what happens? The people with wealth tend to be the people that understand the financial and engineering landscape. So what do? Bye, Canada. So the UK is following the same foul footsteps. The more a country taxes, the more the capital leaves. You need to do the opposite. If you want capital inflows into your country, you need to lower taxes. Anyway, the reason I really want you to understand this is because the Argentinian story gives us a clear crystal ball textbook of what to do over the next 5 to 10 years. It's crystal clear. So how could they have avoided this? What they should have done is borrowed as much peso as possible and levered up to the max, which is the complete opposite of what a financial advisor would tell you to do. Don't borrow, debt is bad. No, debt is freaking good if you do good things with it. So you need to borrow and lever up to the max. You've probably seen me at RT. I'm constantly scrabbling around to try and raise more loans. Honestly, if anyone knows anyone that wants to give $100 grand loan or more, I'll pay £1,000 finder's fee, and I'll be paying 10 to 15%, and I'll do that all day long. You could loan me £10 million right now, and I would bite your hand off, because I know how to arbitrage capital. So debt is good when you know how to use it. If you're a business owner, forward finance as much as you can. So if you have like monthly subscriptions, whatever, try and offer a discount. So hey, pay up front for a year, and get your mitts on as much pesos as you can if you're back in their situation. If you had assets, borrow on the assets in the shitty currency. Because remember, when you borrow something, you owe the debt in the medium of what you borrowed. So typically, if they're borrowing in peso, they owe peso back. That's the key here. Then, 2 key steps here. You have to convert the peso into a safe haven or a harder monetary form. In their case, it would have been the US dollar, because that's what the Argentinian peso is debasing against. But then you could do all of this and still get wrecked, because the last point is the most important point. You've got to store your US dollars offshore. Because remember, the Argentinian government, they're getting debt from the global banks, the central banks around the world. What currency are the Argentinian government in debt to or with? The dollar. So what do? Oh, sorry, rich Argentinians. I see you have some dollars in your account. It's fine. We're just going to take your dollars. We're going to give you some pesos. And then we're going to quickly devalue the peso overnight. That's what happened. Happened in Cyprus in 2012 when they did the bail-ins. So you could have done all of this, levered up to the max, and still end up in up shit's creek because you didn't store your dollars offshore. So at the time, this is in 2021, I said, me thinking I know about exponential growth, because I'm a student of exponential growth, I said, by 2025, we'll see 700 pesos more or plus to the dollar. And I confidently said that, because I thought, exponential growth, I can plot that chart, which would have been like a 99.85%. I was wrong. This is the chart right now. You can't see this. This was from the other day, 882 pesos to the dollar. I underestimated the maths. And there's me that is obsessed with exponential growth and charts that do hockey stick type stuff. It's literally every day I don't look at a hockey stick type chart. And even I underestimated how severe it was going to be. I said 700 by 2025. It's not even that yet, and it's 882. It's just going to keep on going. Just compare the Argentina there with the US. So this is GDP as a percentage of debt. Where's the chart? Oh, I've got the ticker. GDP again, I think it has a percentage of some sort. Does it say 120? Yeah. So as GDP, so US debt as a percentage of GDP, 120%. That's the US right now. US and Argentina, I know they're different charts, but same thing. In fact, what I should have done in hindsight is taken that picture and then compared it against the dollar against Bitcoin. That would be the best comparison.
And that's the official rate, because just checked with the
Correct.
Free market rate's 1,100
Yeah.
to sell your pesos.
Exactly. Bitcoin in Argentina is even higher. It's nuts. So that is the, yes, yes, quickly.
Just going to say, like, Argentina's a lot less messed up than Venezuela, El Salvador, in terms of crime, political stability. It's not
Yeah, which is why it's such.
I'm off the wall with it the last 6 months, but like, why is all this? Like, it's the third biggest economy in the world 100 years ago. Like, it's a huge decline, isn't it?
1928, they switched.
Yeah, socialism.
Turn of the century, they were the richest in the world.
Yeah, exactly. But it's such a good comparison with the UK because we are following in their footsteps. So we know that M2 will exponentially rise. Again, maths. You're going to be sick of me saying maths. I should create a meme, maths, bitch. So this will continue to make people poorer to the tune of 15% per year. So this is that global monetary hurdle that I keep harking on about. When you average the rate of all the currencies on the planet, so when you look at the currencies of every central bank and how much they're expanding the currency supply, the average is 15%. So that's the global monetary hurdle. So if your income and your savings or investments are not making more than 15% per year, you're getting poorer in real terms, okay? This is so important to stress. That's why I don't get out of bed for anything that makes less than 50% per year. I'm not in this to just tread water. You have to make more than 15% per year, otherwise you're getting poorer in real terms. Whereas most people are happy with their 5% a year from some sort of bullshit tracker. Rising M2 will only continue to inflate Bitcoin. Remember, this is why crypto, or let's just say Bitcoin or Casper, whatever I'm just going to stick with Bitcoin. The other reason why it's so important that you are in Bitcoin at the very minimum is because we live in a shitty world of economics like this, but the worse economically speaking, the worse stuff gets, the higher Bitcoin will be inflated away. Because Bitcoin is pretty much the only thing that is running away against every other currency. Therefore, it's a wise move to insulate from insidious wealth erosion and make a large net wealth growth per year. So fast forward to us now. If you were Pablo and Paula, how could you have avoided this? Right now, you need to borrow as much as you can in GBP. That is the shit currency. And lever to the max. Guess what I've been doing for the last 7 years? Honestly, your eyes would water at the amount of debt I've taken on over the last 7 years. Forward finance as much as you can. Borrow on assets in GBP. And then convert your GBP into Bitcoin or Casper. And then store your Bitcoin offshore. The equivalence here is you do not store your Bitcoin on frickin' Coinbase. You are asking to get egregiously abused there. You've got to store it on a Trezor or a Ledger or a Tangent or whatever cold hard wallet you can think of. I keep it old school. I literally write it down. And remember the 3-2-1 principle with your seed phrase. Have more than 3 copies in more than two different formats and store them in more than one location. So I'm old school because that's ultimately, you don't need to really mess around with Trezors and Ledgers. It's the seed phrase that you need to protect. I prefer the Trezor. Everyone has their differences. So Bitcoin is the only financial Noah's Ark out there. It is the ultimate hedge against inflation, monetary debasement and uncertainty. Well, there is another, which, as you all know, I think I think is quite good. And this is where people think, they get me confused. They're like, Simon, you love Casper so much, but why do you only have like 10% of your pot in it? Because for me, Casper's real brilliance will shine in the next cycle, not this cycle. And I've talked about that a lot. So I want to really talk about, I'm going to dive now further into hard money versus weak money. Because what is money? When you look at it from a first principle perspective, money is crystallized work and time, energy. That's all it is. If I, work an hour, I don't know, digging, etc., I can't trade my hour of digging quite easily. So I have to dig for an hour to get something, which is basically money is an NFT of work for the crypto people here. Money is an NFT for work. It's just a thing which represents time that you've spent. So, And this is really important when we think about weak money and this weak and hard money differential. So if we go back in the olden days, gold was typically the store of wealth. And the Knights Templar really basically changed the way that global money worked, because we had the British knights and whatnot, and French, traveling all around Europe, slaughtering people, going, believe in God, no, chop off. That's all we did, the Knights Templar. But they'd have these massive convoys, and they'd have to devote quite a lot of horses and mules to carrying their gold. It's quite inefficient. So what they did, they teamed up with a family of Jews and went, the Jews approached the Knights Templar and went, we've got a better solution for you. Here is the world's first bullion bank. And basically what they said is, hey, Knights Templar, we're going to have a network of these bullion banks all over the world. At that point in time, it's basically Middle East and Europe. So you can deposit your gold in London, go on your crusade, and we'll give you a chit, a promissory note, saying, hey, I've deposited a ton of gold here, and I can get a ton of gold at one of our other branches. It's basically the first bank. And so that's what they did. It basically made them more efficient killers, because they could have more horses to kill people with instead of carrying gold. And so this is why moving forwards now, you need to think of money not in like old-fashioned ways, but as using information theory. And Elon Musk is probably the best first principles thinker on the planet right now. And don't forget, I think he knows more about money than probably anyone on the planet. He was the architect of PayPal. And when you look at the plan he came up with PayPal before he was basically kicked out, he basically said PayPal needs to be Bitcoin. If you look at what he told PayPal, he came up with something like a 15-year vision of what PayPal should do. It's basically Bitcoin. He got booted out. And this is Elon talking about
But I think the cryptocurrency thing is an interesting approach to reducing the error in the database that is called money. I think I have a pretty deep understanding of what money actually is on a practical day-to-day basis because of PayPal. We really got in deep there. And right now, the money system, actually, for practical purposes, is really a bunch of heterogeneous mainframes running old COBOL.
Okay, you mean literally? That's
literally.
That is literally what's happening.
In batch mode. Okay.
In batch mode.
Yeah. I pity the poor bastards who have to maintain that code. Okay, that's a pain. That's pain.
Not even Fortran. It's COBOL. Yep.
It's COBOL. And the banks are still buying mainframes in 2021 and running ancient COBOL code. The Federal Reserve is probably even older than what the banks have, and they have an old COBOL mainframe. And so now, so the government effectively has editing privileges on the money database, and they use those editing privileges to make more money whenever they want, and this increases the error in the database that is money. So I think money should really be viewed through the lens of information theory, and so it's kind of like an internet connection. Like, what's the bandwidth? Total bit rate. What is the latency, jitter, packet drop? Errors in the network, communication. Just think of money like that, basically. I think that's probably the right way to think of it, and then say what system, from an information theory standpoint, allows an economy to function the best. Crypto is an attempt to reduce the error in money that is contributed by governments diluting the money supply as basically a pernicious form of taxation.
And I completely echo everything you said. It's spot on. And so when you think of things in from an information theory standpoint, you need to eliminate friction. You don't want friction in anything. You don't want friction in your internet connection, and you don't want it in money. And at the moment, the reason central banks across the world are insisting on having these a wide mix of these mainframes is because it's the easiest way to maintain their editing privileges on the monetary database. It is literally, adding zeros onto a spreadsheet like that. And the only people that can maintain a mainframe are boomers. There are no millennials out there that know how to maintain a mainframe. It's incredible. And so remember, the reason why governments love having editing privileges on the monetary database is because of the Cantillon effect. Anyone? I'm going to talk about it anyway, regardless. So the Cantillon effect is basically, it's like a sweet shop for the government. So if I'm the Federal Reserve or the US government, and I go, right, I'm going to just print $1 trillion, okay? Cool, I've got $1 trillion. That money has not hit the economy yet. So guess what? Prices of everything is exactly, flat. So I can now go and spend, I can buy whatever I want at this big sweetie shop, which is the world, at current prices. But if I just blow, if I start injecting $1 trillion worth of buying and whatnot, what happens to prices? Yeah, price is like this massive sponge which absorbs any currency supply out there, and it grows. But there's a lag. That's why the average Joe doesn't understand it. The Cantillon effect has a lag of about 12 to 24 months. So take COVID and furloughs and lockdowns. As a globe, we printed $5 trillion out of our asses and went. And is it a surprise now that 3 years later or whatnot, we're having a cost of living crisis? It's just no one understands the connection. So back when we were doing all the furlough lockdown stuff, I was like, guys, give it 2 years, we're going to see a massive spike in prices on freaking everything. And guess what? Wood, we've been getting quotes to build a house at the moment, and it's just eye-watering. Just like the cost of wood. It's just, yeah. Oh yeah, you guys builders, yeah. It's nuts, isn't it? So, yeah. Anyway, so that's the Cantillon effect. A government can print money out of their ass, spend it on whatever prices right now, and know that prices will only go up 12 to 24 months later, depending on the concentration of the assets. If they just, print some money and just go all in on treasury bonds, like they're going to be doing, guess what? The price of treasury bonds is going to go up really freaking fast. And so the yield is then going to start crashing. Another reason why I'm so convinced that rates will drop. And then you have the trickle-down effect. Now, so most economists, when they talk about trickle-down effect, it's wrong. It's flat out wrong. The trickle-down effect happens when they start spaffing money into the economy. I keep saying that word. Keep injecting money into the economy, and then it percolates into other asset classes like stocks, bonds, property, crypto, and it just, for our benefit, crypto is just so sensitive to it. It just picks up. So that's the Cantillon effect, and that's another reason why the rich-poor divide will only continue to do this. Red line is the masses. So I should have, oh God, I can't even read it. 50 to 90th percentile. So basically the average Joe. And this is the top 1%. It's incredible. This is going to continue trending upwards, and this is going to go downwards. Again, maths. So whenever your currency devalues, everything goes up in price, and the devaluation chart will look like Argentina. Weak money always loses, and we haven't learned from history. There's so many fascinating stories in history where weak money is lost. You go to the island of the Yaps, where deep in the South Pacific, you had this island which was devoid of limestone, so they cherished limestone. So it had these massive rye stones, what they called, where they basically drilled a big hole in, and you had various sizes. You had handheld rye stones and massive freaking big ones for the village. Families' net wealth was literally etched into the rye stones, going, hey, I sold you 10 sheep, you owe me 5 chickens. That was their ledger, that was their Bitcoin blockchain. So what did the Europeans do? They went, oh, hi, so you have these stones, limestones as money. Limestone's good, right? Huh. Well, there's an island just over there full of limestone. So what do? Capital arbitrage or technology arbitrage. They went to the limestone island, brought all the limestone to the yaps and went, oh, so we're now rich in this limestone, rhinestone thing. And what did the Europeans do? They bought all the businesses, they bought all the land, and they bought people, i.e. slavery. Europeans are great. And it's just like Africa. Most of Africa, for hundreds of years, have had glass beads as their currency. So what did the Dutch and Europeans do? Again, they went, wait a minute, you live in an ocean of sand, but you have glass as your currency. Now, for the Africans, you know, the weak money, like, yeah. But we had technology on our side, the royal we. So the Europeans were like, you know, you can melt sand into glass? Anyway, so they go and print billions of glass seeds. And what do? They buy land, they buy businesses, they buy people. And they own everything. That's why the UK effectively chopped up, you know, the Middle East and Africa, because hard money at the time, the pound sterling, basically bought everything. So weak money always loses to harder money. Not hard, yeah, harder money. Does that, I mean, the new money is probably rubbish in itself, but it's harder. And this is the dollar. The dollar's purchasing power since the 1900s. And it all went downhill in 1913 from the inception of the Federal Reserve. So, yeah. And by the way, this will continue. Don't be like, oh, a typical value investing, oh no, yeah, it's going to go up now. It's had its drop. There's no economic mechanism out there that will flip this around.
Argentina look like on that chart?
Yeah, even worse. So we are the frogs. We are Pablo and Paula. And I want you all to leave this room later today scared out of your bejesus, like just scared out of your mind. I want to shock you. Just so you teach your kids, you teach your family. Yeah, we are those frogs. So here's a question. If your weak money is dying compared to a new harder money, can you beat this dilution via just earning more? No. Correct. See, this is where the average Joe, when I speak to this, they're like, yeah, but I'll just get a better job, or I'll just start, you know, I'm an airline pilot, I earn a lot, I'll be fine.
Shaving more. What they all say.
Yeah. So the answer is yes, if. There's some big ifs. If your annual income increases faster than your relative inflation rate, and your savings investments grow faster than your relative inflation rate. Now, I've got to talk about relative vectors, because inflation is not this set figure. You know, you see these inflation figures of 6%, whatever. Inflation is a relative vector to yourself, okay? So if you are, I don't know, upper middle class, someone, you know, that nice income, you've got assets and stuff, and you put your money in stocks, bonds, and commodities and property, guess what? Inflation for you is whatever the price of stocks, bonds, commodities, and the property market does, right? That is inflation for you. If you're a typical Gen Z with no job, living in your mother's basement, watching TikTok videos all day, eating ramen noodles, you know, what are your outgoings? You've got no rent or anything, so what's the inflation of ramen noodles? I don't know, and a Netflix subscription. Like, inflation for that useless Gen Z is low, right? So I'm being stereotypical. I'm big black tar brush. Not all Gen Z are useless. So it's a relative vector. So if you're the average UK family or whatever, what is your relative vector? Just use the 15% global monetary hurdle. So is your annual salary increasing more than 15% per year? No. Are your savings investments growing faster than 15% per year? Probably not.
Net assets, right? Because if it's leverage,
Yeah.
then that's good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But
In the Weimar Republic, the poor unionised people got their pay rises. The middle class got slaughtered, but the very poor did really well because the unions kept getting, every time they printed money, the wages went up and up and up.
but not faster than they printed money.
No,
Yeah.
but relatively, the unionised colleagues did amazingly compared to the middle class.
In the very short term, not the medium to long term.
We have to change the government this year.
Well, even the change of government won't affect anything. It's the equivalent of 20 Big Macs a day to 18 Big Macs a day.
They're beholden to the unions.
Yeah, but again, it's very short term. It means jack
At
shit.
the same time, the middle class was completely slaughtered.
Correct, yeah. So basically, going back to that question, can you earn your way out of it? Not really. It all depends on how you deploy your capital. That is the only thing that gets you out of this shithole, is make sure you deploy your capital in things that make more than 15% per year. But you want to, but thing is, poverty and this wealth trap, this wealth debasement trap, has a gravity well, like Earth's gravity well. You've got to get to what, Mach 20 to leave Earth's gravity well, to get to orbit. Poverty has its own gravity well. So if you're making 20% per year, you're not getting out of that. You're going to be just slightly better than the rest of the population. So this is why you need to aim for 50% per year to get out of that monetary or that poverty gravity well. I'm being very aggressive here with my words. I don't mean it that way. It's just easier to make a point. But you know, I'm not that aggressive in real life. Hopefully, you know. So inflation is a relative vector, and so you've got to beat 15%. And this is where Bitcoin Jesus's analogy of that ninja school or like a karate school is so important. So let's say you owned, you know, you're in Japan, whatever, and you have a school of ninjas. And one day the emperor comes to you and goes, I would like 10% of the blood of all of your fighters, you know, because we're fighting a war, we need more plasma. So the ninja owner goes, okay, yeah, we'll donate some blood. It's fine, 10%. Now, this is where biology comes in. Each of your fighters is going to be or have diminished athletic ability because you've reduced their red blood cell count, which means each fighter can now only take in or has a diminished oxygen intake. Okay, so your dojo's effectiveness or fighting efficacy is going to be diminished because you've taken a lot of oxygen from each fighter. Now, one helping of blood is fine, but and it takes roughly 4 to 6 weeks to replenish your red blood cell count, right? So that's fine, but you don't really want to be climbing a mountain anytime soon. But what if the emperor comes back 3 weeks later and goes, I need another pint of blood from each fighter, please? Yeah, okay, you could do it, but your fighters, you know, they're going to be athletically reduced in performance for, you know, good 2 or 3 months now. But what if your emperor keeps coming for blood every 3 weeks? You can't replenish your red blood cell count. And let's say you have a big war or a big competition to fight in a few months' time. You're buggered. So what's happening is you're sucking the oxygen out of each fighter and making them a lot weaker. That's what's happening to the economy right now. So blood is only useful to you if it can absorb oxygen. So oxygen is the real energy here for your blood. The blood is simply the carrier vessel. It's just the transportation thing that transports the valuable asset to where it's needed. And your body basically needs oxygen. So this is what your body needs, and the blood is the carrier vessel. So when you equate this to the economy, what does an economy need? We need economic energy. What is economic energy? Broadly speaking, it's GDP, but really it's the amount of population times the productivity per person, you know, per capita on average, times how many hours a week they work, or how many hours they work per year. That's really what real GDP is how much work energy can each citizen produce in 1 year. So that's what I mean by economic energy. So if you have an economy where the economic energy is being sucked out of it, that's like basically losing oxygen. Well, the currency is the vessel that delivers economic energy around an economy. And then obviously you have the economy. So if you have an economy with no freaking or diminishing economic energy, what use is your currency? Like, it's useless. Yeah. What use is blood with no red blood cells? You'll die. So the economy right now is like an airliner having a rapid decompression. The oxygen is being sucked out of the cabin, and there's only one thing that you need to do. You need to put that freaking mask on your face before anyone else's. Do yours first, then help the person next to you. Because this oxygen mask is Bitcoin. This is literally the only financial arc there is on the planet right now. The only thing which is going to go up in your favor when they start printing willy-nilly. So when you look at it from a much bigger point of view, and I can't think of this now without thinking of James. Annoyingly, you've put your little mind virus into me. Every time I'm going to answer that question. The economy is this plane. You've just had the side blown out of it. We've got lockdowns which will, you know, the long tail effect of lockdowns is still rearing its ugly head. We have energy costs going up, which exacerbates everything else, because if a country has to spend more of its budget on energy costs, it has less budget to spend on other stuff. Commodity costs are going up because of energy costs. We've got war. We have sovereign income going down. Global supply chain is buggered. And state welfare is going up. I mean, that's just poor money management by bureaucracy, red tape. So what we're having is economic entropy. Someone, something, or no, humans are just sucking out the oxygen from our economy. And the average Joe doesn't understand this. They don't understand when we have a war now, the average Joe is going to pay for it 4 years down the line when living costs spike high. And what the government does is, we have a living cost crisis because of the orange man in America or China or whatever. Like, there's always a boogeyman that they pin the blame on, when in fact, all error stems from economic entropy because of money printing, yada, yada, yada. Yes,
Yeah.
quickly.
Give it a different perspective. We've always had wars.
Yep.
We've always had economic crisis. We've always had inflation.
Yes,
World has never ended.
correct.
What makes it so different that what you're saying?
The world doesn't end, but currencies end. And yeah, so this is why you have a changing of the guard of the global monetary system roughly every 100 years or so. I'll come into that. But what does end is the middle class in every country. And then you have a reset, then you grow again. You have the 7 stages of civilization. I don't have time to go into that now. We're on stage 7 right now. The Romans are a prime example. Here's a funny stat with the Romans and every other civilization. The moment you start having celebrity chefs, civilization soon ends. I shit you not. In every major civilization, from the Byzantinians to the Romans to the Mongols, they had, because things are so opulent that you can have stuff that just gets famous and whatever. Celebrity chefs is the death knell of every civilization. Gordon Ramsay, you bastard. And here's the thing with war financing. And it could be a hot war against a country or against whatever, whether it's COVID. War is, an all-encompassing thing. The average population will only put up with a war for about 4 years. We go to Afghanistan, yeah, let's get Osama or whatever. But 4 years later, why are we still at war? I quite like why can't we just spend more money on our borders or, whatever. And so each government has less public backing to continue that war. Meanwhile, the military-industrial complex loves war. It's a racket. So then they have to finance the war via stealth tax. What's a stealth tax? We'll just print more money. The public won't know. Then they have the Cantillon effect, and then before you know it, the public are screwed. So you have war, you have tax of various sorts. Inflation, so you have monetary inflation, expansion of the currency supply, and then that leads to price inflation. Trust loss eventually, then you have an economic crash, then you have a reset. Now the reset manifests itself in different ways, in different times, in different countries. But the reset we will see will happen by 2030 because the World Economic Forum is really gunning for this. So this is Dr. Evil, sorry, Klaus Schwab. The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. By 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. Anyway, we're not going to go into the World Economic Forum today. Long story short, there's tumultuous times ahead. It's terminal. There's nothing anyone can do to stop it. It's not your responsibility to stop it. Your responsibility is to look after your immediate family and, if possible, your close, friends, social bubble, so to speak. And then if you have the means and abundance of capital to then try and help others. But you've got to put on your own family's emergency mask on first. Crypto is that O2 mask. So they're the world differentials and the oxygen mask. Now, we were going to have a quick 15-minute break, but we're not now because it's lunch in 5 minutes and we've still got 30 minutes of slides to go through. We'll come back, yeah. So do you mind if we just power on just for 15 minutes? Yes, quickly. Quickly though. Yeah.
Given everything that we're looking at here and the inevitable arrival of CBDC,
Yes.
are we looking at
that's part of the reset.
currency hyperinflation or just ruins everyone government say, don't worry, we'll save you all, we've got this new system, here you go. And if in the window of opportunity that we haven't fled some of our wealth to Bitcoin, we may sort of be saved, but we'll lose really crucial elements of freedom with our finances because with
100%.
CBDCs they can really restrict what you can do.
Yep.
Is that what you're seeing?
Yes, 100%. What we'll do, it's a long answer, and it's definitely something that will last. CBDCs plus reset. Someone make sure we don't finish today without me talking about that. I've got like a 15-minute answer to that. It's not a quick one. So, Bitcoin as a weapon system. So hopefully you understand Bitcoin as a, in terms of pressure differentials and the oxygen mask. These are like, this is why I'm in crypto. It's not because, I think the chart's going to go to $1 billion, whatever. That's what the average crypto punter does. I'm in this for a much bigger reason because I see the world being fucked. So I need an escape vessel. But there's another side to Bitcoin which a lot of people don't understand. And the thing that really prodded this is, I guess I see things from a slightly different perspective. So as you know, I used to be an Air Force pilot, and in the Air Force, you are a warfighter first, specialist second. So you're a pilot second, but you're a warfighter first. So in my case, I'm an officer first, etc. And during officers training at Cranwell, you do a bit of ground school where you learn about air power and geopolitics and stuff. Not that much, but later on in your career, you learn a bit more. And the Air Force is always obsessed about air power, projection of air power. And as a tiny cadet, a young officer, I was like, yeah, whatever. I just want to fly planes. Just let me fly something. And I sort of, I just ticked the boxes, did the exams, whatever. But as I grew older and I started getting more fascinated with economics, I started realizing the projection of air power has many more meanings than I originally thought. And it's going to be great because I really want to chat with Willie after I've presented all of this, because Willie's, I'm not going to step into that, he's got a very interesting background. Anyway, so when I came across Jason Lowery of the US Space Force, who saw things, who understands the world like I do, and sees Bitcoin like I do as an oxygen mask, etc. He also had this very interesting angle, how that actually Bitcoin is a weapon system, and it's the ultimate projection of power and electrical power. So let's go back to really understand this. So this is my homage to Jason Lowery there, which the Pentagon tried to stop him writing his book. Anyway, so there are more things on the planet which are originated as a weapon system than you can imagine. Take roads. A road is a weapon system. Roads were created by the Romans as a weapon system. So they used them to outspeed their enemy. They had faster supply chains, so they could replenish their troops a lot faster than their enemy. They could project power a lot further and faster than their enemy. The road system was a weapons system with lots of ancillary benefits. If you take, everything stems from the Romans. The reason that you have solid rocket boosters the size that they are is because all the road systems and train track systems are derived from the Romans, because the Roman wagons are a certain width. That's why all train tracks are still a certain width. Everything stems from the Romans. It's fascinating. And then fast forward to GPS. Now, for a long time, scientists, we had the technology long before they actually created it. And they're like, oh, this is really good. We could put some satellites up. We can talk to each other, But for a long time, scientists didn't get the funding for GPS until the military needed it. Now, why all of a sudden did they need it? Polaris. No, sorry, was it Trident back then? So basically, in the old days, in fact, to an extent, a lot of nukes these days, a nuclear missile, they rely on a lot of different navigation systems. But historically, probably still now, they stargaze. So once the missile is in the air, it triangulates its position using star maps, and it has INS and all that sort of stuff. But what they found is that, so in fact, let's talk about INS quickly. So inertia navigation system. So an INS simply works by, it goes, right, I'm turning right, cool, we've gone right. So it tracks your position based on where you set it. So if you go forward a bit, then right a bit, the INS remembers that and goes, oh, you're here on the planet because you've gone forward, up, down, left, right. And it's only accurate to a certain extent. So on a plane, typically, you turn your INS on, it takes 5 minutes to sort of work out where it is. And if you turn on the plane, you know, a lot further from where you turned it off, it takes more time to recalibrate. Now, INS is useless after about a couple of weeks to a month, and so submarines had issues with calibrating their INS because they'd be going underwater for months, INS is a bit shit, and they realized, we need GPS. GPS is a weapon system because it ensured the destruction of the Soviet Union. That is how it got backing. Once politicians realized we need GPS to have more accurate nuclear capabilities to ensure the destruction of the Soviet Union if we needed, that's when GPS came across. And then obviously military used it, you know, for troops and you had what, 50-meter accuracy back in the day. Now it's like a meter with your phone. It's crazy. Got hundreds of billions of research all in your phone. It's amazing. So GPS was actually, it came about because it is a weapon system. We needed it for our nukes to ensure the destruction of the Soviet Union. Then we look at the internet. The internet, believe it or not, is a weapon system. Physicists in Hawaii wanted to talk to the mainland and swap notes, right? That's how the internet first came about. But then, guess what? It took a while to get funding for a proper rollout of the internet because the politicians and war planners didn't really understand it until the Cold War kicked off, and they're like, oh, wait a minute. In the event of a nuclear war, we need ways to maintain C2, so command and control. How do we do that? What we need is a nuclear-proof communication system. Oh, wait, we've got the internet. And so that's how TCP/IP came around. It's a nuclear-resistant communications infrastructure so that a country can maintain command and control in the event of a big war. Obviously, I'm being very Willie will be able to talk to this in way more depth, but I'm just trying to speed through this. And then Bitcoin comes along, which is interesting because in my book that I wrote in 2017, the crypto book, at the end I sort of posited that there is a probability, a meaningful probability that Bitcoin could be a long-term Trojan horse. Because in 1996, the NSA released a paper of minting electronic money or something like that. Anyway, when you read it, it's almost identical to the Bitcoin white paper. And then you're thinking, wait a minute, how is Bitcoin secured? It's secured via SHA-256-bit encryption. Who invented SHA-256? The NSA. So everything about Bitcoin, even the randomizers. So there's certain randomizing tools in the world that you can use to randomize numbers, etc. Bitcoin uses the only randomizer that is not on the official list of randomizers. And the NSA created that randomizer, and no one has the de-logging, the software for that, the decrypting thing for that. And I've spoken to a lot of clever hackers, and I said, look, SHA-256 is pretty much open source. Everyone knows all about it, but could there be a backdoor if someone had the decryption thing for the randomizer that SHA-256 and the Bitcoin algorithm uses? And they went, yeah, if you knew how the randomizer worked, then you could work out, yeah, you could crack it. So basically, Bitcoin has the potential to be a weapon system because it's a nuclear, yeah, here we go. Not only is it a solid chain of custody and property rights, it's a store of economic energy, and it's a nuclear-proof data transfer, wealth transfer infrastructure. So this bit is going to be a bit hard to sort of get your head around for a while. I'm going to keep on talking about some other analogies, but try and remember this. Bitcoin, you can have property rights, which is irrefutable. It's a store of economic energy, and it's a nuclear attack resistant infrastructure to transfer data and wealth. So what is the world as we know it? If you look at it from a computer game perspective or a coding perspective, the world is simply a map with nodes, right? And nodes talk to each other, whether it's they're talking or they're sending finance and money or trade to each other. But that's basically the world as we know it. It's a bunch of nodes that have links to each other. Now, in the old days, how did this used to work? You'd have each node talking to each other, and you'd have supply lines, i.e. ships. So you would trade with each other node, each other country via ships. But for as long as ships are around, there's always pirates. So in order to secure your means of trade, etc., you needed to protect that line of communication, that node of transport, that node of trade. So what do? You have to reinforce it with a military. In the old days, it's basically the Navy. You can't have supply lines without protection from the Navy, from the pirates. Not only do you need to protect the supply lines, you need civilization. You need a proper chain of custody, and you need law, right? So what's stopping a country taking in a load of goods and going, I don't fancy paying for these goods, I'm just going to have it. So you need something to back it up, don't you? You need the chain of law, and you need something to enforce law. So it's like playing GTA. If you misbehave enough and you get more police sirens, eventually the army comes in. It's the same in the real world. If you stop paying for something, it escalates, and escalation always ends up violent if you keep going. Humans, we have not really evolved. Things will always escalate till blood comes out, really, if you keep escalating. And so, and that's basically the world. You have, you need law and order. You need property rights, so you can prove that you own what you say you own. And you need a way to protect those chains of commerce and trade and communication. So what about Bitcoin? Bitcoin is, the Bitcoin miners is the mercenarial army that protects the Bitcoin network. For example, if you had a country that, a whole bunch of miners, a big chunk of miners that started mining empty blocks, that's an attack on the Bitcoin network. So if all of a sudden we had a country that started mining empty blocks, the mercenarial army, which is the Bitcoin miners, go, oh, bad actors, right, then it becomes a hash rate war. So the Bitcoin miners are this decentralized and incentivized mercenarial army that maintains the Bitcoin network, which is the biggest supercomputer on the planet by far. You could take all the servers and mainframes of all the central banks in the world, all the tech companies in the world, from OpenAI to Google to Microsoft. Nothing comes close to the computing power of Bitcoin because of this unbeatable mercenarial army, which is the Bitcoin miners. Bitcoin has never been hacked, And so a prime example of this is China. Or is it Donald Trump saying China when I say China? So China was the biggest Bitcoin miner on the planet. And Bitcoin has now been battle tested. Because everyone's always said, up until this Chinese incident, that, what if you had a rogue element that tried to, do a hard fork and do a 51% brute force attack? Well, we saw this. In 2021, China banned all things crypto. They banned Bitcoin mining, they banned everything. And now Bitcoin miners, they're not just a little room with some servers. These are huge factories filled to the brim with, actually they look like this. Basically, factories all over China, suddenly banned. So what happened is the hash rate dropped off a cliff. And it just so happened that we sort of peaked around Bitcoin highs around then. The hash rate dropped. And this was the first proper attack on Bitcoin because China were the biggest miners. So what happened is that all these miners, they're massive. You have to think of them like S&P 500 companies. They're not going to roll over and die. They go, okay, well, Jesus, we're going to have to find a country which is friendly, move all of our factories to another country, source the internet and blah, 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 and energy, and then we can come online. And that's what happened. Bitcoin had a lull for about 6 to 9 months whilst the globe basically the Bitcoin miners had to take up that extra slack. But what happened? Hash rate hasn't looked back. Bitcoin is this thing which won't be hacked unless someone has that randomizer. But the thing is, you can get all conspiratorial about this Bitcoin Trojan horse theory. We are not the threat. We are not the enemy. If it is an NSA Trojan horse, we are not the enemy. It's there in case Bitcoin becomes this global standard and an adversary, China or Russia, whatever, wants to adopt it, and then it's a way to basically steal wealth out of your enemy. So we don't need to worry about all that. And if that does rear its ugly head, that's like 10, 20 years in the future or more. So Bitcoin has this positive flywheel. It's the world's most resilient network that can't be hacked. So guess what? That attracts more users because people trust it. Trust attracts more users. Price then goes up as a nice side effect. It continues to reward the miners, and it will attract more miners because the price is going up. Miners continue to increase the hash rate, which increases the security of the network, which then means it's the most resilient network. And this is a positive flywheel upwards. So this is mutually assured preservation. The reason you had two competing countries with a growing nuclear arsenal is because of that old phrase of mutually assured destruction. No nukes will be lobbed because one side that lobbed nukes, the other side's going to lob, and then everyone dies. That's mutually assured destruction. That's how the Cold War was sort of at loggerheads. But with Bitcoin, if we were to move over to some sort of Bitcoin standard, we'd have mutually assured preservation because your enemies just become frenemies. And this is a great quote. I don't know who said it, but every day Bitcoin doesn't go to zero is another day that it will never go to zero because of that positive flywheel. And the thing is, history is written by the victors. Historically, whoever won the war wrote what actually happened. You'd burn all the books of the country you just defeated. And so unfortunately, yeah, we have to look at history via the lens of the victors. But when it comes to monetary history, we've got some sort of optics. And this is where we have the global reserve system currencies. People think, because we have such a limited lifespan, you're really only active 60, 70 years of your life. And so what is the norm for you? You think is the norm throughout time, perpetual or whatever. But it's not the case. Historically, a global reserve currency lasts for 100 years, and then something else takes over. So we had roughly 1,000 years of the Byzantine currency, which got debased horrifically, just like the Romans debased their currencies. I mean, Diocletian was in 240 AD had the first documented hyperinflation, and nothing has changed because politicians always do the same thing. And so we then had the Florentine florin and the Venetian ducat as sort of dual global currencies for the best part of a couple hundred years. Then the Portuguese took over. Then the Spanish had a really big empire. And then, people like to say the British had the biggest empire ever, which in some metrics was true. But we simply just piggybacked off the Dutch. People don't realize how powerful the Dutch empire was back in the day. And we sort of just basically stepped off their big shoulders and basically controlled the world after that. Because the pound got you things. The pound was the hardest big swinging dick of the day. And then the dollar, then we had World War II, and then the dollar took off in its various forms. The dollar has not been in the same form for, it's morphed a lot. And so I was talking with someone outside about the dollar, and basically the last time the dollar shifted was on the 15th of August 1971 when President Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. So in 1944, basically, the world convened to try and mend what happened because of World War II. So they fixed every currency on the planet to the dollar and the pound sterling, and they forced the price of gold at $35 an ounce. And that was it. We had this pseudo bullshit gold standard. But in 1971, because there was a run on the dollar and everyone wanted to basically call Nixon's bluff, he chopped that peg from the dollar and gold, which made every currency on the planet a fiat currency. A fiat currency has an average lifespan of 40 years. This is why the dollar has had various guises. Now, I think this is wrong. Okay, so this is from BCM Research, this chart. I think this is too optimistic. I actually see roughly 2 currencies in here before the dollar becomes the global world reserve currency. I think it's highly likely the next global reserve currency is going to be a BRICS-based currency. So the BRICS are growing like no tomorrow. India is the fastest growing country on the planet by a country mile at the moment because they have the youth. They are actually having sex and having babies, whereas the rest of the world isn't. Nigeria is also another powerhouse that people are sleeping on. So I see Nigeria and India like where China was in the 1990s, or 80s, really a sleeping giant. Anyway, the BRICS are getting a lot of power. I bet within a decade we will see a brick-based currency. I don't know what they'll back it on, a portion of gold, a portion of Bitcoin, I don't know. But the BRICS will release a currency which will take out the dollar. That will last a fair while. And you're going to have the CBD, central bank digital currency shenanigans. That's more of like a payment rail. It won't be a global reserve currency, but I think you'll see some sort of CBD-based BRICS currency. That will be the next reserve currency, and then eventually Bitcoin. So going back to, and sometimes you'll have a dual-based global reserve currency. So here, just like you had with the Venetians and the Florentines, you had two equally sized economies and the currencies not harmoniously living together, but just like we have now, we have the dollar and Bitcoin. So, basically, when you look at history from a physics point of view, history is a time partition ledger of the country who could project the most energy. Now, historically, projection of power is whoever could project the most amount of kinetic energy in either a huge amount in a short period of time, like a blitzkrieg type thing, or can you outlast your enemy in terms of kinetic energy projection. And this is a slide from Ray Dalio's video, but someone has superimposed Bitcoin. This, in the actual video of Ray Dalio, this is China. And this is so true. This is what happens. And when you have the crossing of powers, the changing of the guard, guess what always happens without fail? War. So, the only thing I can really 100% predict is more war. So you're probably thinking maybe, is Bitcoin offensive or defensive? Like with any weapon, it's all done on perspective of the victim or the user. A gun is an inert, well, it's not really inert, but it's an inanimate object until you pull it. But it's like that Shakespeare saying, nothing is good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. A weapon is the same. It can be used offensively or defensively, just like the road system. That could be used offensively or defensively. So if Sun Tzu was here and had more of a science background, I think he would change his rules of the art of war to, can you project more joules per second over a longer epoch than your enemy? That's my phrase. Because really, when I look at war from a first principle point of view, I think that's it. Moving forwards, it's can you project more joules per second over a longer epoch than your enemy? Now, the energy could be in different forms. It could be in electrical energy. It could be nuclear energy if you're lobbing nukes. But so let's break this down in terms of projection of power, because this is really where I see crypto. So if you go back to the basics, if I were to punch you in your face, I am basically exerting an amount of kinetic energy into your head mass, and I'm moving your head mass. That's basically what a fight is, right? And if you can exert enough kinetic energy into your head mass, you can hopefully knock them out. This is why you have weight classes in boxing. There will just be a scientifically level where a smaller person just cannot have enough force to knock a bigger person out. Force is what? Mass times acceleration. So humans are quite intuitive, not intuitive. They're quite ingenious. I can't think of the word. But basically, we are like, okay, how can we project more force? So we're like, oh, wait a minute, I could get a stick, and that's a lot more powerful than a punch. And so, when you have a stick, you then have moments and arms, and you can get more force with the same, tiny muscles. And then shit escalates. We come up with sticks, then guns, then swords, and bombs, then nukes. And stuff gets a bit out of hand until you end up lobbing a nuclear warhead out of a howitzer. So, I'm not going to play this video. This is a 15 kiloton nuke fired out of an artillery piece. For perspective, Hiroshima and Nagasaki was about 15 to 18 kilotons. But yeah, I find nukes absolutely fascinating. I've done deep dive in nukes, and you get, yeah. Anyway, moving forward, because we're late. So basically, the animal that projects the most energy controls the flow of information and distribution of resources and property. That is what humans have done over time. But nature, what nature does is they create stalemate weapons. So, you have hardened foreheads, for a fight. And then you may have horns. But what happens in nature with animals is that the weapons that they create end up with a stalemate of some sort. What humans never do is create, or not what nature never really does, is create a species-ending weapon. There's no animal out there with a species-ending weapon other than us stupid bipedal chimps. And so really, when you look at history, our civilization is basically proof of war. You know, you have proof of work with Bitcoin because the miners have to prove the work and the calculations that they do to come up with the number for the 10-minute quiz. Well, I'm British, right? I'm half Asian, half English, but I consider myself British. The fact that I can stand here and say I'm British is because of how many millions of lives have done. It's proof of war. The reason that the UK is an entity in itself is because the UK has projected force out there over however long. We have defended our borders to the point where we can say, yeah, we're the UK. Just like the Americans. Any Americans here? No? Well, if you're American, you can say you're American because guess what? You projected force and projection of power, and you went, see you later, Queenie, and kicked the English out, and you can now say you're American. So civilization, countries in itself, is simply proof of war. That is it. And so eventually we will hopefully escalate or advance into a civilization where he who projects the most electrical energy wins the war. I should really rewrite Sun Tzu's Art of War, but with physics. Sorry, I've got to speed on. Can you write down the question? Sorry, we're so late for lunch. So I'm really hoping that war evolves into an electrical energy projection sort of thing, because nukes are too expensive now. Not expensive in terms of money, but the moment one nuke is lobbed, it's never just one nuke, is it? So if one nuke is lobbed, 1,000 nukes are lobbed. So we really need a non-species ending stalemate weapon. Now I've got two solutions. I think the first solution, or ideally I think Bitcoin will be that solution in the long run, but in the interim I don't think so. I think that there's going to have to be levels of progression here. So as we now know, or we've always known, major global conflicts are written in blood. Effectively, that's what it is. When you have a conflict with another country, it's written in blood. I think it's better written in hash rate, because then your enemies become frenemies. And eventually, wouldn't it be better to, winning a war based on $100 billion worth of electricity expenditure, or millions of deaths? I prefer this option. And it can get to that if the world embraces Bitcoin. But I think in the interim, I genuinely believe that war will move more towards a drone-based war, which I think could be the first mini sort of move into a stalemate ending weapon. Like deer with horns, I think it could be drones. Now this is a cool, I'm not going to play all of it, but basically, this is...
I'm coming to you!
Drones are really clever. AI-armed drones, with optical recognition. There's nothing you can do to stop them at the moment. There's obviously a film, but stuff does exist like this. Anyway, watch the film. Is Olympus have fallen or something like that? Anyway. Olympus has fallen or Angel has fallen? It's one of them. Good film. Anyway, so what I'd like to see happening is that we have a massive macro and micro drone arms race where every country will have a whole bunch of drones, and then you have a massive drone fight in the North Sea or the Atlantic or whatever, and whichever drone army or Air Force wins, the other country goes, shit, okay, you got us. We'll relent. Now that is me being very optimistic. Because I've dived down into drones, and you now have micro drones and nano drones to the point where, and this already exists, where you can have drones so smaller than a fly, and you can fly that drone through the mouth or up the nostril of your enemy, and it has a small explosive charge in it. So technically, you could have millions of drones. You release them over a country via jet or whatever, and they slowly float down, and they can go into buildings and up the nose of your politician enemies, whatever, and you can then hold them as ransom. It's like, right, we're going to pop an artery if you don't say yes. But yeah, it gets a bit scary. So I'm hoping we can have a stalemate ending, a stalemate type war, a weapon instead of a species ending weapon. I'm being very optimistic. I don't really have much faith in humanity. Other than the fact that we're very adaptive, we do adapt very well. So yeah, the real reason Bitcoin needs to be expensive is so that it becomes too expensive for a 51% brute force attack, which it already is. And the thing is, if it's too expensive to attack and beat, everyone will remember that flywheel. If it's too expensive to destroy and beat, everyone will then flock to it because it is the ultimate store of chain of custody, property rights, and store of wealth. In a world of uncertainty, you want something where you know if I store it on the blockchain or the Bitcoin network, no one can steal it, hack it, or disprove it. So it's that flywheel. So mutually assured preservation. So therefore, me trying to be all scientific and whatnot, I tried to come up with an equation. So this is where the world sits right now. Human life plus chemical energy, you know, whether it's petrol to bullets and bombs, plus economic energy, plus electrical energy, plus money, which is the carrier vessel for economic energy, equals the cost of chain of command, property rights, and rule of law. That's how the world is right now. If you were to really try and break it down into bare bones, first principle thinking, there's a lot of variables there, but ultimately, and the cost of chain of custody, proof of property rights, and rule of law is normally written in written in blood, unfortunately. We're seeing this already. Ideally, it needs to be the cost of chain of custody, property rights, and rule of law. Hopefully, it should it should be written in electrical energy instead of blood. So you're probably a bit confused, and I completely get that. Because please watch the videos. At the moment, the world chain of custody, property rights, and rule of law is basically being enforced by the US empire, really. So back in the, you know, that is basically it. So how much does that cost us, the US empire, to be the world police? Well, when you look at it, basically the US consumes roughly 20% of the world's energy. So when you look at it from an MTOE, so megatons equivalent of energy, and everyone goes, oh, Bitcoin is rubbish, blah, blah, blah. But Bitcoin is literally, is a bit higher now, but it's still insignificant compared to countries. Bitcoin usage is still insignificant compared to Visa, MasterCard, the financial system as it is. And so if you're looking at invasions and stuff, like how much is it to invade a country right now? It's billions of dollars per day. How much is it to invade Bitcoin? You can't. You literally can't. And so at the moment, 20% of the world's energy is used for chain of custody, property rights, and rule of law, whereas Bitcoin uses a smidge over 1% of the global energy supply. You can completely change it with just using Bitcoin. So it is a much more efficient way to do it. So this is how I see Bitcoin in terms of world differentials, the oxygen mask, and the side thing of the geopolitical side.
Mr. Madison, what you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Okay, a simple wrong would have done just fine, but
you remain one.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure people on YouTube are going to be thinking this about me and all this malarkey I've just said. Now, obviously those with smooth brains would say that. Does anyone know what animal that brain comes from? The smoothest brain on the planet. It's a brain? A koala. A koala is so stupid that if you took a whole bunch of eucalyptus leaves and put it in front of it, it wouldn't understand what you've just done. Because in its brain, eucalyptus comes on branches and twigs. So it doesn't even recognize a pile of eucalyptus leaves. Koalas are dumb. Why? Because they've got a smooth brain.
But they're also stoned most of the time.
Yes, they are. So, so for those with smooth brains, I've created a few bullet points here. And these are this is how I see the world in one slide. This is exactly how I see the world. And this all stems from you, James Dilly. I've made one slide to show the world how I see things happening. And now, like with anything, I'm a single data point in a sea or an ocean of data points, because everyone has opinions, like arseholes. So we have an aging population plus falling economic output, which means we will have lower GDP until the robots come. So I'm ignoring, so this up until, say, 2030. It's going to take 6 years for AI and bipedal robots to replace the workforce, at least. So with lower GDP equals tax hikes, because governments always do that. We've seen that in Canada. Plus more borrowing to service the deficits. You remember the interest-only repayments is just going sky high? It won't be long before the US is spending $2 trillion a year on interest repayments. More borrowing equals rate cuts plus crazy stim pumps. That's what politicians can only do. It's the only thing they can do, i.e. more liquidity. I've talked about the liquidity cycle all morning. Hopefully you understand that. More cowbell. More cowbell, as in more liquidity, equals crypto mooning, and weak money gets weaker. Weaker money exacerbates all of the previous points. Rinse and repeat in every country throughout time. Yeah, as long as humans will exist, this slide will apply. And it has applied throughout all of history. Just put a different country on it, different time. Yeah, take a picture. TM, Siam kid. No. And ultimately, as I said, it's the global liquidity cycle. We are literally right there. When this chart gets up here, what am I going to be doing? Selling everything. Well, maybe not everything. I will always keep some wealth in Bitcoin as that oxygen mask just in case. And we'll talk about, probably in the Q&A session when I talk about all this, why you really don't want to ever fully exit from crypto into fiat. Because whatever you go into fiat, you probably won't ever be able to get back into crypto without signing away your soul to your bank. And then this chart leads into my fractal model where, yeah, I'm still freaking confident that we will see 200, 250K Bitcoin by Q4 next year, or 1st of December, plus or minus 30 days. And that coincides with the power law.